And welcome everyone. I'll just do a quick introduction myself and I'll turn it over to my wonderful colleagues here joining us. I'm Vinay Venkatesan. I am the research director at Everest Group. I lead the Megaforces research area. I've spent the large part of the last decade in strategic foresight, including future casting, trend analysis, and scenario planning. Joining me today are two of my wonderful colleagues, Siddesh and Jillian. So I'll let them introduce themselves. Maybe Jillian, you want to go next, and we can hand it over to Siddesh.
Sure. Thank you, Vinay. And hi, everyone. My name is Jillian Walker. I am a vice president with the Advanced-SciTech team here at Everest Group, and that is the team that houses all of our Megaforces research. I've been working in this field for a little over a decade and very excited to kind of share with you some of our thinking today. Sudash?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And hello, both of you, and hello, audience. I'm Siddesh. I'm a research manager with Everest Group's Advanced-SciTech team. I primarily study emerging forces across business models, environmental priorities, social and geopolitical dynamics, and technological transformations. Really excited for this discussion today with all of us. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Siddesh. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Great. So just to set up a little bit of context around this topic, we've recently published a series of studies that focus on environmental priorities as a major theme, and specifically focused on mega forces or mega trends, as you may call them, such as energy hungry world, how businesses are building resilience, and then regenerative enterprises. And during our research, one thing that consistently stood out to us and through our conversations is that sustainability is fundamentally changing the definition of value for many organizations. Traditionally, we've seen sustainability as a way to minimize damage, simply just do less harm. But our findings now reveal a major shift. Leading organizations are now building sustainable systems that don't just do that, but how can they thrive under pressure? And so the shift in mindset has opened up a lot of opportunities for competitive advantage through regeneration. And so in today's session, we'll learn about how this kind of shift in mindset is taking shape and how companies are executing on this. And there are four broad areas, I would say. One is that they're doing this by conserving natural capital rather than just consuming it. And by doing this, they're able to control their supply chain better. They're building operational resilience to withstand geopolitical pressures and adapt to change on an ongoing basis, given the world that we're in. They're monetizing renewal by turning sustainable actions into real business growth by investing and developing new technologies. And lastly, by scaling, what we would call a nature positive environment and ensuring that that progress, just not only benefits the business, but the larger context of in terms of the environment, right? So this means that companies are no longer looking at sustainability as a really as a checkbox or a cost. They see it now as a strategic opportunity for growth, for building resilience in the long term, and essentially value creation. So we'll pose a few provocations, and that's how we will kind of take the webinar forward in terms of why this is happening, how is this happening, and as business leaders, what can you, our attendees today, do about it, right? So Milan, can we go to the next slide? We have a poll question. So before we get into those four provocations, we wanted to really open this up, to our attendees, and really pose an important question about the future of competitive advantage as you see it from a sustainability standpoint. So according to you, which of these forces, will really create the next wave of competitive advantage? Is it circularity and resource use? Is it technology-driven sustainability, localized and resilient supply chains, or transparency and traceability? So I'd like everyone to rank these factors, perhaps from a 1 to 4, which is lowest to highest potential, in terms of ability to convert those into opportunities for growth. So you should be seeing this poll up on screen right now. You see some very interesting answers coming in. I'll just give it a quick second. And while everybody else is, just answering, as a small gesture for joining us, we'd love to offer all of you a complimentary 30-minute briefing on our latest report, which is Building Resilience. We'll share insights from that research, but we're really excited to hear from you. What are your current challenges? What are your strategic priorities when you think about long-term resiliency? And if you'd like to take us up on that, just indicate your interest in that post-webinar survey that our team will send out to you, and we'll reach out to you, to work around a schedule that works best for you. I think we're good. Maybe Milan, can we post the results up on screen? Great. So you should see this right now is that, technology-driven sustainability is kind of leading, but as I can imagine, it is kind of a mixed a bag of results from circularity to technology to localized and resilient supply chain. And we see transparency and traceability, which earlier used to rank pretty high, is now starting to slowly wane. Not that it's in terms of waning in terms of how companies are starting to look at it, but from an opportunity generation standpoint. So that's quite interesting. Um, Let me go here and share results again. Great. So with that, we can move on to the next slide here. So these are our four provocations that we'll be talking about today, right? So we've structured this conversation around the fact that we will get into each of these provocations. Why do we say that, and what are the signals, right? First is that resource insecurity is making operational resilience a business priority, and that's like never before. We're all seeing how disruptions in supply chains and scarcity of inputs, is really shaking the foundation of business, right? Second, we're seeing sustainability move from being a cost concern and it's becoming a real value multiplier for organizations. And I know Jillian has a few things to share on that. So we're increasingly interacting with business leaders that are discovering, that sustainability can shape growth, enhance brand reputation, and open up new market opportunities instead of just being a checkbox for compliance. The third is that there are new business models and operating models that are changing that landscape, creating new, fresh ways to generate and monetize value through renewal. So we are seeing companies innovate towards that direction, bringing in products, services, processes that help create those new streams of revenue, and more importantly, new areas of customer engagement. And then fourth is technology, of course, playing a transformative role, turning renewal into a source of competitive advantage. And that's not just about, cost and improving efficiency, but enabling us to think about sustainability at scale and converting that into competitive advantage. And finally, we'll wrap with some perspectives from the panel here around, action steps. What kind of challenges are businesses likely to face in this pursuit, and what leaders might want to do right now to stay ahead of this changing environment. So maybe let's go ahead and tackle that first provocation. Milan, if we can go to the next slide, is that let's start with a very simple but uncomfortable truth, right? Our resource base is shrinking than faster than most businesses today would like to acknowledge, right? Companies often treat food and water as background assumptions, thinking that, they will be available as long as we can pay for them, right? But those are breaking down pretty fast, right? So these two dynamics really illustrate this clearly. So by 2050, we see global demand for food rising by over 56%. But if you look at it from a farmland per person, that's going to be about half of what it is today. So this is clearly not just about population growth. It's really about how various things are coming into context and play, whether it's urbanization, soil degradation, and just competing land use for greater cultivation of energy and energy crops and infrastructure. So in other words, we're going to be trying to feed more people with a lot less land and a lot less predictable weather. So if you think of it from the larger context, think about what that means for your supply chain. It's not just a problem for everybody who's directly associated with it. It spills into energy prices, logistics cost, labor productivity even. And we'll see that kind of second, third order of effect coming into companies that have necessarily don't consume a lot of water or food or energy for that matter. If you look at water, the story is actually even more dire. Over 70 countries are expected to face severe water stress by 2050. And that essentially means from an economic output standpoint, that could, you know, mean shaving off up to 6% in GDP. And that's not in an abstract way. We know that water scarcity constrains industrial output, it constrains energy generation, even digital infrastructure. Look at, data centers and semiconductor fabrication, facilities. They're enormous water users. And if you look at the map, the hotspots that used to be the hotspots before no longer are just those, right? So there's parts of Europe, South America, even China's industrial heartlands. They're all likely to face rising stress. And that means water is just not going to be a regional issue. It's quickly going to turn into a systemic one, especially as we are seeing that from a data center standpoint, and that's disrupting entire value chains. Can we go to the next slide? I think there's two facets to this. One is, of course, resource shortages, but also control, right? And this is where it becomes even more complex. We talk about efficiency gains, we talk about decarbonization, but if we look at per capita energy demand, that's actually rising quite sharply. And it's not just heavy industries anymore. Like I said, it's data centers, it's electric vehicles, it's all of that digital infrastructure powering AI. In fact, every AI model we train consumes megawatts and megawatts that barely existed in energy that businesses consume up until a decade ago. So we're shifting from fossil fuels. We're seeing that increasing appetite for energy that's accelerating. And that's a pretty rude paradox that companies will have to live with for years. Yes, we want clean energy, but how do we generate more of that clean energy? How do we make it abundant, or even for a matter of fact, infinite, right? So the conversation actually shifts then about not just how green your energy is, but how stable is your access to that energy, right? And the other aspect is control, right? Control, as many nations see today, is the new competitive advantage. And we can see that happening as countries are tightening control over critical minerals, the very inputs that you need, such as batteries, chips, renewable technologies that go into many industries that we work with today. So the number of raw materials under export restrictions has almost jumped 23% since 2016. And so that's not just a temporary thing. It's going to have a structural change in terms of how we think about resource sovereignty. So as nations realize whoever's controlling lithium, copper, rare earth doesn't just control the commodity, they actually control the pace of innovation, the pace of industrial transition. And you can see that across so many examples today, right? China's graphite export limitations, Indonesia's nickel strategy, even US's recent endeavor, for local supply chains. So we're seeing that kind of pan out. And yes, businesses are standing up and taking notice of that now. So we do have a few interesting, aspects to, how that's changing into economic value or how business are looking at it. And then we'll go into some very interesting examples. So I'm going to quickly turn it over to Jillian to cover the next provocation. If we can go to the next slide, Manal.
So we're going to talk a little bit about how sustainability is shifting from a cost imperative to a value multiplier. And if we go to the next slide here, the slide that you'll see shows how that relationship between sustainability and business performance has really fundamentally changed. So on the left, you can see that the data here is illuminating one of the most striking economic trends that we've seen over the past decade. I'm sure that this is quite familiar, but it's worth looking at, right, which is the dramatic fall in renewable energy cost, which I think creates a kind of template for what we're going to see around other sustainable technologies. So in 2009, solar and wind projects were several times more expensive than their fossil fuel-based alternatives. But today, that global average cost of new solar power has really dropped by more than 80%, and onshore wind by more than 70%. And in many countries, right now, renewables are now the lowest cost option for new power generation. And these cost declines are really the result of continuous technological progress, better manufacturing efficiency, learning that comes from just scaling deployment. So what became a kind of climate goal has really become this more market-driven transformation of the global energy system. And if we look to the right of the screen here, we can look at some research that's helping us understand how this might apply to the wider economy, if you will. So this is research out of Harvard's analysis of public filings that shows about 45% of US listed companies in relevant industries are now reporting developing or selling climate-related products or services. And this is up from 20% in 2005. So quite a dramatic shift here. And the most rapid growth is again coming from those industries that are shaping the physical economy. So we're thinking industries like manufacturing, like construction, transportation, utilities. These are industries that are really focused on building, very practical technologies, cleaner vehicles, right? Scaling renewable energy, as we just talked about, sustainable aviation fuel, improving energy efficiency of buildings and materials. And each initiative here is representing, real capital investment and a rethinking of how goods and infrastructure are produced. I think what this pattern is really kind of telling us is that, again, sustainability, it's not confined to specialized or niche firms. It's becoming really embedded in that mainstream industrial fabric. And when we look at these two pieces of evidence together, what we see, I think, is a really powerful economic conclusion. We think about falling renewable costs that reduce barriers to adoption, and then wider adoption accelerates and becomes this kind of economic feedback loop that brings in more innovation, brings in more competition, brings in more investment, and so on. And over time, that reinforces itself through supply chains and capital markets. And that transition is now being driven by profitability and scale as opposed to policy and regulations, right? So business leaders who are looking at this, I think the key takeaway here is that sustainability has become an essential indicator now of competitive strength, and that firms that are connecting this kind of sustainable alignment or climate alignment with product innovation, and many of these are actively doing so, product innovation, operational efficiency, long-term resource strategy, those are the ones that are really looking future forward to where growth and investment is going to be over the next couple of decades. If we go to the next slide here, we'll talk a little bit about resilient operations that are yielding strong and measurable returns. So this slide moves from the broad market shifts to what's really happening inside organizations that are embedding sustainability into their operations. So we have data here from the EcoVadis global data set that shows how clear progress is being made in things like sustainable procurement performance. So over the past several years, companies have steadily improved how they're evaluating suppliers, tracking environmental social impacts, doing things like integrating sustainability into the decision-making process. And what the findings were, and you can see here how these improvements are beginning to really correlate with better operational outcomes. And that's for very practical reasons, right? It lowers risk exposure, it increases supply chain transparency, it strengthens supplier relationships, so that firms that are kind of maintaining that long-term sustainability program, those are the ones that are tending to experience fewer disruptions and demonstrate, higher degrees of adaptability when there are external shocks that occur to the supply chain or to risk exposure. We also have here data that is highlighting the companies that are investing in more strategic sourcing and uh, climate proofing initiatives that are frequently seeing more significant ROI in that investment. So one report here estimates that proactive climate adaptation and mitigation measures can yield multiple dollars of benefit for every dollar invested. So that's happening again through very practical, pragmatic outcomes like avoided losses, operational savings, productivity gains. Again, this is where we're seeing sustainability and the practicality of investments in these areas converging, right? The food and beverage sector is a useful one to look at. It offers a good illustration of this. So companies in that space are finding a lot of value in reducing food waste, in waste valorization, in optimizing energy, water reuse, supporting regenerative agriculture. So these two priorities, again, are no longer acting in opposition, right? So the sustainability converging with the benefits, right? We're seeing similar patterns that are emerging in manufacturing, materials, industries, again, efficiency programs, circular design being built in, from the initial product design. Those approaches, or manufacturing design, those approaches are lowering costs, they're strengthening market positioning. So again, that convergence is coming across here. And across these examples, I think, again, the pattern that we're seeing stand out is that these sustainability initiatives are delivering on operational, not just kind of reputational returns. By improving this visibility into things like supply chains, by optimizing resource use, these companies are both managing volatility more efficiently and building credibility with a broad base of stakeholders. So these are the actions, I think, that are really creating the business systems that perform more reliably, again, when you see external conditions change. Another maybe larger conclusion here is that sustainability has, again, what we're seeing, it's maturing into this kind of practical framework for operational excellence. Organizations that are beginning to sort of treat it as a management discipline, that they're measuring, they're adjusting, they're investing systematically. Those are the ones that are developing the capabilities that really define their own sustainable performance. So again, as Vinay had noted in the previous section that we just talked about, when we see environments that are shaped by business environments, right, that are shaped by climate pressure, by resource constraints, shifting customer expectations, the companies that we are seeing beginning to invest in these areas are the ones that are best positioned, right, to outperform in the long run. So I'm going to now pass it over, I think, to Siddesh. He's going to talk a little bit more about our next section here.
Yeah.
Our next
Yeah.
provocation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jillian, and thank you, Vinay, for the context earlier upfront. So just a quick recap. So far, we have seen how growing resource insecurity is forcing companies to think beyond short-term fixes and to guarantee more of the long-term resource supply and business continuity. We've also seen how sustainability efforts are no longer just moral or regulatory imperatives. They are becoming more about economical advantage or engines of growth. But putting those two contexts in sight, let's move on to see what are some of the new business models. Still on the previous page. Sorry. Let's see how some of the new business models are emerging around sustainability. The idea is these models will create real measurable value. And after that, we will also see some of how technology is helping turn sustainability into more genuine competitive advantage. On the next page, if we move on. Yeah. So the business potential behind sustainability-led models is expanding rapidly. We all have heard about, let's take the idea of circularity, for instance. It's expected to grow at around $4.5 trillion by 2030, which is a huge number. But circularity essentially goes far beyond just recycling. Uh, think about all the new equipments that are being used for renewable energies today. Wind turbine blades, solar panels, EV batteries. Many of these technologies have been deployed just over the past decade and are quickly reaching their end of life. So this opens up entirely new opportunities for businesses, from refurbishing to reusing to full-scale recovery systems around these new materials. And on top of this, circularity core is the digital era. As we are evolving into the digital era, these circular loop systems are getting smarter. So companies are essentially adding a layer of intelligence on top of this circular systems with data, AI, and IoT to track and optimize and manage these resources more effectively. So, which we believe that all of this layer of circular systems with integrated smart data brings together some sort of systemic advantage by lowering material dependency and improving overall resource use. To to really put that thing into perspective, let's put this into numbers. So we've already extracted about 70% of Earth's virgin materials, which is far beyond Earth's natural capacity to replenish it. Right. So if you think about it, circularity is just not an environmental goal anymore. It's essential to guarantee material supply for the future. If you think about plastics on the right hand side, it tells a very similar story. So again, to quote some numbers, around 20 percentage, only about 20 percentage of plastic waste today is getting recycled, and the level of uncontrolled waste that is piling up in landfills is expected to double in the next decade or so. So that level of imbalance does not just create an environmental urgency; it opens up huge business opportunity for companies willing to rethink how waste can be valuable. And it's clearly evident in the numbers that is put up here that how the value of recycled plastic is expected to grow significantly in the next couple of decades. Yeah. So on the next page, let's look at a few examples where essentially companies have revamped their business models around sustainability. So let's take one of the examples. The first one is around Michelin. So we all know a Michelin tire company. It is now recently started offering its fleet customers tires as a service operations. So basically, instead of selling tires upfront, they charge the customers or the users based on usage, like a per kilometer or per mile basis. So the advantages around this is that it lets Michelin retain the ownership of the tire. It allows them to monitor the wear and tear of the tires through connected devices that they do with vehicle connected technologies today. And it also helps them control what happens to the tire when it reaches end of life. And tires, as we all know, are huge landfill issues. So they've rolled this out in essentially some of the European markets. And European markets are about to introduce a new vehicles end of life policy that will require the dismantling of pretty much every part of a vehicle before it is scrapped. So by introducing this business model, or the tires as a service business, Michelin is essentially getting ahead of these and any other future regulations by taking ownership of the tire's end of life while also capturing recurring revenue and valuable data around usage patterns. It's just interesting. The second example I feel is also quite interesting. It comes from Denmark, where a partnership called Kalundborg, apologize my pronunciation, Symbiosis, connects about 17 companies in one municipality. So what they do is they share resources in this industrial ecosystem, wherein one company's surplus in terms of steam, water, or byproducts are getting used into another's input. This is a strong example of how collaboration between industries or companies can reduce waste and create shared value. Now, we acknowledge that scaling something like this on a global scale might require some supportive regulations. But I still feel it's a very powerful local model that can show what's possible when industries work together. The last example is actually quite interesting. It's from IKEA. We all have heard about IKEA. So what they have done is quite different here. What they've done is they have started to manage large forest holdings to secure sustainable wood supply. Now, what this benefits IKEA is in three ways. It creates them cost stability, like even if the cost of wood goes up, they will not have to worry about it much. It creates brand credibility. Like if you tell IKEA customers that I'm using sustainable wood, well, that's a checkbox for them. And the last one is it creates long-term price advantage compared to their peers. They can think about what's going to be the price of their raw materials 5 years down the line, which their peers may not be able to. If you think about it, Tesla is also doing something very similar with the lithium-ion battery manufacturing in the US. But let's come back to IKEA. What we feel IKEA is primarily doing is it's turning forest management into a strategic advantage rather than just a compliance requirement. Many companies do ESG initiatives in terms of forest management. So instead of a compliance requirement, they have taken this initiative to benefit their own business. Of course, this level of vertical integration also brings in greater scrutiny. As you are managing the natural resources yourself, you become more responsible for how it is managed. But regardless, we feel that these examples show how sustainability can move from being just an operational checkbox to a pillar in business strategy. Moving on to the next slide. So now, at the heart of most of these renewable strategies is technology. It is what turns essentially sustainability from a vision into a competitive advantage that can be measured and scaled. And we are seeing some major capital flows in this page, in this space on the next page. Yeah, so as I said, we are seeing some heavy amount of capital flowing into this space. For example, the corporate investments in nature-based solutions, which include things like carbon sequestration or biodiversity protection or food and water security, is really growing at about 40% per year. Remember, this is corporate investment, not public finance or government initiatives or NGOs. These are businesses investing in it. At the same time, on the right-hand side, if you see the venture capital funding for climate and renewal technologies is also increasing roughly at around 38%. What these numbers show is clearly a recognition that sustainable technologies deliver real ROI. It reduces risk, it strengthens resilience, it drives growth. On the next slide, we have a few examples to quote around technology also. So one of the first one is this company named Hiro, Hiro, which essentially makes baby diapers. So what they do is they supplement these diapers with a plastic eating fungi pouch, which comes separately from the diaper. And people can, after use, they just add these pouches to the diapers, and these diapers then decompose in just 1 to 3 years, as against taking 300 to 500 years that it would typically take in a landfill. So it not only creates environmental benefits, they are using biotech to not only create environmental benefits, but also create new market opportunities in sustainable products. Another example is coming from Crusoe. So before I jump into this example, here are a couple of facts that many of you may not be aware of. So every AI query that you run, every GPT search that we run, it evaporates about 20 liters of water just to cool the servers. And most of these data centers, as we know, are located in resource scarce region for energy and economic reasons, which really puts pressure on local water systems. So Crusoe has essentially developed a closed-loop, direct-to-chip liquid cooling system that captures and recycles that water almost completely, eliminating water waste. So this example essentially showcases how circularity can ingrain in the very product innovation to give you an advantage over your peers. The last example is coming from Singapore. There's this company named Another Food. They're producing cell cultured coffee. So that yields basically a new batch of coffee harvest every 14 days, as against which is about 20 times faster than traditional farming. So not only does this reduce the time to harvest, it also cuts the land and water use dramatically while creating localized and resilient food supply. We spoke about export restrictions a few slides ago. So, in a world where geopolitical tensions can actually disrupt food trade overnight, innovations like this can help regions secure their own food systems while reducing environmental impact. So essentially, to conclude these last couple of sections, we see how circular business models and collaborative industrial ecosystems, like in case of the Denmark example, and technological innovations can embed sustainability into the very core of business strategies. It is not just about doing good for the planet anymore. It is becoming one of the key ingredient for future business resilience. With that, I think I will hand it back to Vinay to carry us out to the last section of what should leaders do on this.
Awesome. Thank you, Siddesh. And it's always great to read about these fascinating examples and so many innovations out there. If I were to sum it up, and maybe we can go to the next slide here, and I'll probably open up the floor. Um, what leaders need to do today to stay ahead of the curve? I think the message is this: resilience, as we can imagine, cannot sit on the sidelines of growth anymore. It has to be designed into the growth strategy itself. Most companies we talked to today are still wired for short-term wins. Hit that next quarter target, trim the cost, move on. But the smart ones are really the ones that are looking at quietly shifting capital and KPI towards things that build resilience, which may not necessarily show up in your next quarter returns, but diversifying suppliers, investing in regenerative sourcing, even redesigning logistics to cut dependencies on single routes. All of these things matter. All of these things add up, right? The second thing is securing, critical inputs. Anyone managing supply knows today that it's not just about chasing the lowest cost anymore. It's ensuring that you can get that material at all, right? So that's where, Siddesh noted of Tesla, and several of these players, they're locking in direct contracts with mining firms. They're co-investing in battery recycling facilities to secure rare metals. That's the kind of forward thinking that we're seeing. And it's not just about, ensuring your supply chain, but about how do you optimize it in the best way possible. I think the third is that redesigning for circular advantage. Circularity always, we always take an idealistic view at it, but it's amazing to see how practical it's becoming. Very few companies have made it through intelligent systems, through prolonging, the life of the product. And that also leads to a tons of data points in terms of how they can, optimize their product, considering that a lot of it has become software defined. Is that these kind of models are they are a cost, but they're also going to scale sustainability in the long run. In terms of business models, we heard about Michelin. There are so many others. They're thinking about how can I not sell just a product, but start selling outcomes, right? You know, um, reduce the cost to replace the product and put that into building more resiliency, more customer engagement around that, right? And then ultimately R&D, that's really the bridge as we can imagine between what's ambitious and what's executionable, right? So there are many technologies that Sudesh talked about in terms of bio-based materials, even agentic optimization. They're all starting to, look more real. They're starting to bring to, an inflection point. And so the question is, whether we're ready to place our bets on these frontier technologies or so-called frontier technologies that we used to imagine are probably almost a decade ahead, right? So the leaders that we are really seeing winning are those that are taking those risks, that are placing those bets, and that are really thinking about how can I make this scalable and not just sustainable. So I'd like some views here. Perhaps, Jillian, maybe we go with you. What kind of challenges that you think companies might face as they're kind of pursuing this journey, and maybe where can they go from here? And then we can pass it over to Siddesh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I think, there are still quite a few number of challenges that companies are going to face on this journey. Even though there is a lot of ROI, there's a lot of benefit there, and I do think there's a lot of opportunity for growth. The need, of course, as you articulated earlier, is there. But when we look at some of those challenges, one, scale is a big challenge. For example, from a sourcing perspective, I think there are companies that often look for more, sustainable materials, and finding those materials at scale can be really tough. So in some ways, the market is still caught between a supply and demand mismatch. And so, we'll have to see as we start scaling up some of these more sustainable solutions. Like I said, a lot of companies do have their kind of sustainability plans and goals, and initiatives, but meeting those objectives can be tough when you're still waiting to see enough scale kind of build up to meet that demand. From the standpoint of developing sustainable solutions, perennial problem is always balancing investment in new business versus core or legacy business or core legacy products and solutions. We've seen this, of course, in the automotive industry, especially in the United States, where these legacy OEMs are having to straddle between new alternative vehicles while also supporting their existing internal combustion engine portfolio. So balance, how do you find that balance between investing in the solutions of tomorrow versus continuing to invest in building out the solutions that are in your current portfolio. Finally, I think one of the big things to think about here is the communication aspect of strategy, right? So especially from maybe an investor or shareholder standpoint, maybe less a challenge, I guess I would say, but certainly a priority, because some of these new solutions that are being developed, especially from the manufacturing or industrial landscape, they do require heavy investment in development, right? And there is a certain amount of patience that is required before seeing those products perhaps turn a profit, right? And so effectively communicating that strategy, especially to investors in the shareholder community becomes really critical in terms of being able to support that strategy moving forward.
Yeah.
That's actually quite an interesting perspective, especially around that communication aspect. Siddesh, any points to add?
Yeah, one thing I think I would probably add just one more thing. At the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned about mindset shift, and I feel that's one of the biggest key. So I think as far as leaders are concerned, they need to think about how uh, we would have to shift capital, incentives, KPIs towards long-term value creation and not just short-term cost and efficiency. That mindset shift, I feel, is the biggest challenge. And one of the ways I think it's way to achieve it is to really integrate renewal efforts into the core of the products and services, either through tech innovations or through models. And if we have the mindset that renewal efforts are a cost factor, we would always keep trying to minimize it or do the bare minimum. It was only when we changed that mindset and sorry, and integrate it into the core of business operations, I think that is when it will come. And then after that, it's always possible to monetize it with sensible business models and monitor and grow it to scale. But I think that mindset shift is essential.
And that's absolutely true. And I think that mindset shift is also a key motivator as to, the kind of tangible results that we're seeing
Yeah.
with the type of examples, with the type of investments that you showed going in. Great. I know, Siddesh, you have some questions that came in before the session that I think we might share with the
Mm.
larger audience, as we can all benefit from them. So maybe I'll hand it over to you on that.
Sure. So we had one from before and one right now. Please
Okay.
encourage everyone else to keep adding more questions into the chat box. Um, so the first one is, how can enterprises effectively quantify and report long-term value creation beyond standard ROI? So any thoughts on that, Jillian or Vinay? I think I have a few points to add in there. Uh, ROI is essential, but I think there are better ways to always define things.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I can go first. I think in terms of, when we track traditional ROI, we always think about efficiency. But if you're thinking about renewal or resiliency, or regenerative ROI, just measuring just tangibly how each dollar invested, strengthens or converts into ecosystem health, your long-term resilience. I mean, you can think about it as, shifting from counting profits to how do you show measurable progress over time. So I think there are some ways in which companies are starting to measure that, although may not be direct. But things like how flexible is your supply chain? How fast can you get a product to the consumer, and how long are they able to keep it, right, without chucking it or essentially replacing it? Or what kind of a community have you built that supports the ability to replace it in a sustainable manner? They're also tracking the ripple effects, how investing is, renewing, strengthening partners, ecosystems, local economies. We see companies like Unilever, Orsted, they're looking at
Mhm.
impact multipliers, that typically look at, the ripple effects from a community resilience standpoint. Have we uplifted the biodiversity around us? How ready are our partners to support this on this journey? So these may not be directly measurable or trackable, but they are good indicators of how all of these efforts can compound in value, right? So it's
Right. So
I think
it's,
the
I think that's
story is not just about. Sorry, I just heard some disturbance. The story is, I think, more about, not just that we saved money, but it's about, how did we build resilience and options for the future to stay and thrive in our business as fast and as long as we can. Any thoughts, Jillian, on that?
No, no, I mean, I would just second that. I think when we think about ROI here, I think we're thinking about it in a very broad fashion. It is about reducing risk exposure. It is about planning for, I just point out that all of the statistics that you pointed to at the beginning of of this webinar, there is a tangible critical need that is going to become more acute without, I would say, technology innovation. Things like water sourcing, or yeah, access to critical minerals. You can name quite a few things.
Mhm.
The energy that's going to be required to power artificial intelligence and data centers and all of that. The trajectories are very clear. Right. And so we know that there's that future demand. So not only are we thinking about reducing risk, as you, I think, articulated there, Vinay, but also, planning for all of that future demand that, it's clear. It's clear it's there. And so that value story to me is really aligning with these solutions.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
Sudesh,
No,
I
I
know you had
think
some. Yeah.
no, I
Okay.
think both of you have covered most of the points that came to me. I feel uh, resource efficiency gains, like how much are you less dependent on suppliers, how resilient are you to supplier shocks. Uh, that's a good way to measure. In addition to ROI, I don't feel ROI can go away. It's a much broader subject. Um, I don't think that can be replaced per se, but yes, sustainability efforts have got more nuances to it. So it would be important to measure out those nuances. Before I move on to the second question that came in onto the chat, Vinay, do you want to talk about the complementary access to meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. Just as a reminder, we'd like to extend this to everybody attending here. We'd love to catch up on a 30-minute briefing in terms of, we can bring together some of our findings from the report, but we'd also love to hear from you as to, how are you thinking about this? What kind of challenges are you facing in that pursuit? And, perhaps we can kind of find ways to work together. Siddesh, you also mentioned that there's another question
Yes,
that just
I'll
came
come up with
in.
the
Maybe
second.
we
Yes,
Perfect. Yeah,
yes,
let's just
I'll
do that.
I'll take that up. So the second question that came up was, if I am, or how do an ESG aware company reconcile with energy demands of AI when implementing it? So that's a very interesting point. Like, that AI consumes so much of energy, but how can and my company as a practice is cognizant of it. What do I do about it? How do I reconcile these two issues? Because AI, everybody is using it, and it's not going away for now. Yeah, any thoughts to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, and I know you'll probably add a little more color than I can, as you had just covered the topic here. I
Yeah,
think it's true that, I mean, it's inevitable, right? AI is consuming energy. We know that it's happening, but I think it also pushes us to think about sustainability in a smarter way, right? And
yeah,
there's a lot of things kind of intertwined with it, from a geopolitical, from a social impact standpoint, from a resource shortage standpoint. There are so many
yeah,
things that are coming together to make sure that we find good technologically sound solutions and fast and scalable solutions, right? And that's where you brought up that example around Crusoe. Um,
yeah,
I, I think, some companies are timing their AI work to, run when renewable energy is available or most available. There are some that
correct.
are trying to make it efficient in most ways, trying to spot waste or leakage of energy and try to optimize it in the best way possible. Small operational changes that can, cut water use. But I think there's a lot more to be done. It's a significant opportunity potential area that we see, coming up in the next few years. So maybe I'll hand it back to you, Siddesh
Yeah,
and Jillian.
yeah, absolutely. I have a couple that came up to me. One is around the very model that we are running. We don't need to always be running general AI or all-purpose AI. It could be very much pruned and quantized to the specific task at hand. It would reduce the computational intensity by miles. So that's where I think it's also beneficial to optimize the algorithm that we're running. The other thing that came up to me was, uh, you mentioned about people using or companies using large data centers using solar or renewable technology, renewable energies to supplement their computational load. So one thing which has been ticking up in my radar and in our radar is nuclear technologies. So nuclear technologies are getting safer in many ways. Small modular reactors, we call them, or industry calls them. They're relatively small, about the size of like a DG plant, a diesel generator plant. Uh, Much safer to operate. They are in the radar of a lot of these data centers to run run huge amounts of energy in a safe and environmentally friendly manner. So the reason I brought in nuclear tech in SMR is that these are all technological innovations. SMR is still in the late plant lot. It's still yet to get full-fledged commercialized. It's not in that, it's at that cusp yet, but it's bound to come around in the next couple of years. So yeah, I feel innovations around technology, cooling systems, like we spoke about Crusoe, algorithmic optimization, these are some of the ways to really work around energy for AI.
Mhm. Yeah, and the only thing I would add here is I think this is just an area where market push and some of the other pressures that these data center operators are coming under is going to help spur that innovation, right? I mean, you see a lot of pushback around where these data centers are going to be built, right? Even by the communities in those areas around, again, water use or energy use or the amount of cost it would just take to increase energy production in that area to support it. And so those pressures too are going to drive a lot of these innovations that both Siddesh and Vinay have are talking about, and it is going to be a multi-pronged approach in terms of, do we need to do all of our inferencing at the data center? Can be pushed to the edge? Does that help? Can we integrate more renewables? Can we have more efficient solutions? Can we optimize the models themselves so that they require less energy use? So I think, again, this is one of those places where the demand for better solutions is going to meet up with innovation in this area.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's all we had in terms of questions, but really encourage anyone else on this webinar to please drop in any questions that you may have. You can always reach out to uh, either three of us for additional questions or further conversations. Vinay, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to, if we don't have the time in this session, we'd love to take you up on a question and maybe even a conversation going forward, and see how we can kind of together unpack a lot of the things that we talked about today. We have a few other, slides to finish off the session. Maybe, Milan, if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, I think we did talk about this. We'd love to get on a session, really establish a baseline of what kind of knowledge can we bring to the table and what kind of challenges you are trying to solve. So we can go ahead and do that and schedule that. In terms of content, I mean, I did mention that a lot of the content that we talked about today and the topic that was at hand, came as a common theme across the studies that we've recently published. So we'd love to, have a chance to present this if you're interested, but also, go ahead and feel free to check these out. And I believe you can get access to an abstract on each of these topics. So we'd love to hear from you on that as well. Milan, next slide. Yeah, and this is just a very quick kind of a precursor to our Advanced-SciTech team. We deal with a lot of the stuff again, mega forces or mega trends is, one particular aspect of it, but we have a much larger team of really talented, really experienced people in this, science and technology from an R&D and innovation standpoint, and we'd love to see, how we can help you kind of unpack some of the questions that you might have. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us on the session. I believe this is the last slide. Right? Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.